Hi, you guys. Welcome back to the Amani Talks podcast. You're here with your host, Amani Talks. I'm so jittery to get into this episode because I'm still going through my marriage season for season 3 of the podcast. New episode coming out Friday. I have a friend coming out for an interview episode. So make sure you guys are subscribed, comment to keep you in the loop because this Friday's episode is going to be really good. But let's get into what we're going to talk about today for our Talk Tuesday, right? So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit, I guess, of my thinking and history and knowledge about what I thought marriage was versus what I now know marriage to be right now, and help you guys, a lot of the Christian women, through if you are still idolizing marriage. For all my single Christian women, I'm still in my 20s, and you might, I don't know. When you're younger, it's easier to say, oh, I don't idolize marriage right now, but I'm going to walk you guys through some scripture that really helped me to stop idolizing marriage, because I have idolized marriage ever since I was 13 years old. I'm telling you guys. And I don't think that that's uncommon. For a lot of women, we do grow up putting marriage on a pedestal, thinking about what marriage would feel like and sound like. And we see our parents married and we think our one true love is out there and everyone is called to marriage. We idolize marriage as a society even. And that's why a lot of our marriages, at least in this country, fail, because we have absolutely no idea what marriage is, the purpose that God set it up for, and what it's actually supposed to look like and be used for. So like I said, I'm going to give you guys a little background about how I used to feel about it. So I used to really think that, and I know this is going to sound maybe a little silly, but it's the truth. So let's just be honest. I used to think that soulmates were a real thing. I used to think that when God created one person, he created another person. And I thought that because, number one, I wasn't really in the word and I wasn't reading things for myself. So these were just my own ideas based off of Adam and Eve. I go, well, if God created Adam and he saw that Adam was lonely and he said himself, it's not good for man to be alone, he created Eve for Adam. So I'm thinking, okay, if he created Eve for Adam, then that means for every man, he created a woman, or for every woman, he created a man. I really thought that, you guys. I used to really think, it was all in fate and God's timing, and it wasn't a matter of if you were going to get married, it was a matter of when. Now, I knew that not every person gets married, but I thought that if you did not get married, you were outside of the will of God. You just weren't doing things correctly. So I really grew up having this idea about true love and soulmates, and we got to find each other and we'll, get married and we'll be within God's will. Oh my gosh, you guys, I used to think that hard. And I would say even up until recently, I would say I've just come to realize what marriage actually is just in the past year and a half. And so I have had this preconceived notion, a false notion about what marriage was for over a decade. I would say 15 years of my life, I had an incorrect idea about what marriage is. So let's get into the word and see exactly what marriage is. And I'm going to share with you guys the verses that led me and really delivered me from idolizing marriage. And let me just say this also before we jump into, getting into everything. I feel so freed now that I don't idolize marriage. I really do. Because if you really believe the concept of a soulmate, or you believe that there's somebody for everybody out there, that means that to some measure, to some degree, that you have to put in work to find that person. They're not just going to walk into your apartment door and be like, I'm your husband, and y'all get married. That means if we have soulmates out there, that means that every single one of us have to put in work to find a man or to find a woman. And oh my gosh, the things that when you're on the internet that they tell you, especially for women, about how to find a husband. You will find dating gurus, dating coaches, women trying to tell you how to find a husband. You'll find and I think, to be honest with you, I think that's all bullcrap. If I'm just being completely honest, I think that the idea of a dating coach when dating is so personalized, the idea that somebody can coach you through your own personalized experiences and really understand your trauma, your childhood, how you grew up, which all goes into how you view marriage and relationships. How, like, come on, like, I just feel like dating coaches and people trying to tell you how to find a man, I just feel like that's all fake. So when I was out in the world and I had this idea about soulmates and I'm listening to, dating coaches on TikTok, you put in so much effort. So I have been working for myself and working from home, and I've been working, outside of the realm of a 9 to 5 for a few years. So just in that, if I'm at home all day and a man is not going to walk through my apartment door, do you know the effort that it takes for me to say, okay, I'm done working for the day. Let me put on makeup, make sure my hair looks good, and go out to happy hour at a hotel bar, which is what they tell you to do. Let me look nice, but not too expensive. Let me go by myself. They're just like, I'm telling you guys, it's just so exhausting. It was so exhausting. And I used to literally get so anxious and mentally exhausted thinking about how I have to do so much to go out and find a man, because that's what the world tells you. You have to find a man. You got to find a woman. That's what the world tells you. They don't tell you about finding God or, the concept of, putting your life in God's hands and God's will. They don't tell you that. They tell you to go out and find your man, which that concept is not biblical either. It's actually the antithesis of what God says marriage is to begin with. But yeah, so the whole idea of you going out and you having a purpose in life to find your other, it's just so exhausting. And I feel so freed. I feel like it is in God's hands. Of course, I have to do my part and leave my apartment, but it's all within God's will. And I have to trust him and trust that he's preparing me if marriage is even my calling. So I'm going to stop there and let's just get into it. Okay, so the book of the Bible that really did it for me, and I'm telling y'all, 1 Corinthians is just that book. There are just so many concepts and topics in 1 Corinthians that when you read it, you'll go, oh, that's what that is for. That's what that's supposed to look like. This is how I'm supposed to be living my life. I'm telling you, 1 Corinthians is just that book. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7 specifically talks about marriage and the principles of marriage pretty much. So let me start off with this. Like, oh my gosh, after I read this chapter, I was reading this when I was still visiting my family in New York like a few weeks ago. And I'm literally on the futon in my mom's study, and that's where I was sleeping, just looking at this and going, oh my gosh, I get it now. Like, I get it. So, okay, let's get into it. So first of all, we have to talk about why God created marriage in the first place. What is the purpose of marriage? One thing that I love that Brittany Gold said, and that was the guest on my last full conversation of the podcast. If you guys missed the episode last Friday, go back and watch it. It was a great conversation about Christian dating within the church and everything. So one thing that she said that I loved is that when we go to heaven, we aren't going to heaven and standing before God as husband and wife. We go by ourselves. So if we are born by ourselves, when we die, when we go to heaven, we are by ourselves. When we know that there's no marriage in heaven, right? Why are we married on earth? And when we think about the purpose of everything that we do on earth as Christians, we all know that above all, our goal in life should always be to praise, worship, and glorify God. So if what we are doing in everyday life is not to glorify God or advance his kingdom, then you know that what you are doing is outside of the will of God. So how does marriage glorify God? What is the purpose of marriage? Why did God create marriage? I believe that God created a lot of institutions in our lives to mirror his love for us. So starting in Ephesians 5:25, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it to make it belong to God. So that verse right there shows us exactly why God created marriage, so that we can understand Christ's love for the church. And our limited human understanding of things and also our sinful nature, there are going to be a lot of things that we will not be able to understand unless we are able to exemplify it in our own lives. You understand what I'm saying? So in our limited human understanding, how are we to understand love? How are we to understand God's love for us? Or to truly understand how Christ really loves the church and how Christ gave himself for us? In order for us to really understand God's love, I think that he gave us marriage and children so that we could fully have an idea, just a portion of an idea of God's love for us. Because parents out there, think about how much you love your children. Think about how much you do anything for your children. That is only 1% of God's love for us. God loves your children more than you do, and you know how much you love them. So that speaks to the volume about how indescribable and enormous God's love is for us. And I think that he gives us these small examples like marriage and children so that we can have some kind of understanding of what love feels like. And when we love our husbands, we love our wives, we love our children, we understand God's love for us. So now that we have a very general understanding of why God created marriage, let's really get into the word and see, okay, so what does marriage look like? Is everyone called to marriage? Yada, yada. Let's get into that. So to answer the question about if everyone is called to marriage, I want to get into what Jesus himself says about marriage and celibacy in Matthew. So in Matthew 19, his disciples are asking him about marriage and divorce and stuff like that. And he says, all cannot accept this saying, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who were born thus from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have been made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He who is able to accept it, let him accept it. So Jesus is saying right there that there are going to be people who abstain from sex and are able to really kind of abstain from that desire and devote their whole lives to God. He's saying he who is able to accept it, let him accept it. So Jesus is saying right there, not everyone is going to be called to marriage. That's coming from Jesus' own mouth. When he's saying he who is able to accept it, let him accept it, I interpret that as that's a gift. It's a gift that people are able to kind of put sexual desires behind them and devote their lives to God. That's not something that everyone's going to be able to do. So my understanding with that is, celibacy, abstaining from sex, devoting your life to God is a gift that not everyone will have. And then Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Right there, another example of someone saying it's good for you to abstain from sex. But then he said, nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife and let each woman have her own husband. So right there, he's reiterating pretty much what Jesus said in the book of Matthew. It is a gift and it is good for you to abstain from sex, devote your life to God like a eunuch, but it is a gift. And if you cannot put sexual desire behind you, go ahead and get married, because it's better for you to get married, right, than for you to be out here fornicating because you have that sexual desire and temptation about you. Go ahead and get married. That's what he's saying. And then once again, in the same chapter 7, verse 8, Paul says, but I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. And we know that Paul was unmarried. The next verse says, but if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Doubling down on what he was saying before. If you don't get married and you remain as I am, unmarried and devoting your life to God, that's good. That should be your first thought. I think as a society, we default to marriage. We default to everyone should get marriage. But Paul is telling us that's not the default. The default is for you to remain unmarried and devote your life to God. But if you cannot put sexual desire, if you're burning with passion and you're like, no, I want kids, I want to have sex, then you go ahead and get married. But that should not be the default, because it's better for you to remain unmarried and devote your life to God like Paul did. So just within those few verses, we are learning that it's actually a good thing for you to be able to abstain from sex and not get married. But these verses also acknowledge that very few people are going to have that gift to be able to put sexual desire behind them. So you have marriage so that you do not sin. Right there, we have one principle of marriage. And then another verse, y'all, because I was just reading verse after verse, and it's just like Paul is like doubling down. Like he wants us to get the message that we should not be over here putting marriage on a pedestal. We should be devoting our whole life to God on a pedestal. So I'm just getting like verse after verse. So verse 38. So then he who gives her in marriage does well, but he who does not give her in marriage does better. Paul is telling y'all, like he is telling us, you do better by not getting married and devoting all your time to advancing God's kingdom. There's so many verses that say this. And then the next verse he says, a wife is bound by law as long as her husband lives. But if her husband dies, she is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. But she is happier, she remains as she is, according to my judgment. And I think I also have the Spirit of God. So Paul is literally saying, if you ask me, if a woman is unmarried, she's better off. She is better off because she can marry into her life under the will of God. Like I don't want to say marry God, but that's basically the concept. Like he's saying, if you're unmarried, you're good, girl. Like it's actually better for women not to get married, because we know that as women, our role in marriage is under our husband. Now, is that to say that our husbands are going to rule over us as tyrants and we are under our husband's thumb? No, but we do know that the Bible tells us to submit to our husbands. And when we get married, we are not our own. So that's getting into what we are about to get into next. So we've already established that there are several verses in the Bible that tell us that it is better for us to remain unmarried, devote our lives to God. But if we cannot, and we desire children, and we burn it with passion, go ahead and get married then. So we've already established that it's actually better for you to remain unmarried. So going back to the beginning of 1 Corinthians 7, verse 4 says, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So this is telling us that once you are in the marriage, right, you are not your own person anymore. And that is not you being under your spouse. It's literally saying when you marry each other, you become one flesh. The Bible tells us that. So whatever you want personally doesn't matter anymore. You have to consult your wife or your husband with pretty much everything that you do. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? No, but just think about how you move as a single person. For me, right? I can do whatever I want to do. I don't got to ask nobody about nothing. I live by myself. I live well. If I want to pick up tomorrow and go to Costa Rica for a month, I can do that. I don't have to consult anyone. I don't have anything latching me even to Atlanta. Like I can get up and move as I please. I can go and see who I want to see. I can do all things. Of course, I want to be within the will of God with everything that I do. So I'm going to consult him. But that's even what Paul was saying before, how a wife will consult her husband with things. I consult God. I'm married to God right now. The way that a wife would check in with her husband, before she makes a large purchase, or, if they want to, if she wants to move to a different city or whatever the case may be, the way that a wife will consult her husband is the way that a single woman consults God. And that's the only person she has to consult, right? Of course, a married woman is going to consult God with everything that she does too, but that's what her husband's role is. Her husband is under God, and then he is kind of like the spiritual leader of the house, the one that's going to consult God for all the major life decisions, all the major family decisions. And then he tells the wife what they're going to do, right? So they are both under the will and submission of God, because the husband is going to submit to God and then the wife submits to the husband. So automatically she's under the will of God if her husband is really doing what he's supposed to be doing, right? And I know that there are a lot of relationships out there that don't operate that way, but those are out of the will of God. We're talking about marriages that are actually submitting to God's will, right? Like we're talking about true blue God-led marriages right now. But like I said, me as a single woman, I don't have to submit to any man besides God. God moves my life. When I get married, my husband is low-key, not even low-key, high-key moving my life. And I have to submit my will to him in hopes, trusting him that he is submitting his will to God, when I could just, when I'm single, poof, cut out the middleman, and automatically I'm submitting my will to God. You understand what I'm saying? In that same chapter 7, verse 32, Paul says, but I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. So right there, he's saying, when you're single, all you have to do is submit your will to God. That's all you got to do. But when you're married, you have to go through these channels of making sure your wife and your kids are good. You have to submit to the confines of marriage and children when you're married with children. Man, I'm telling you guys, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, that entire chapter, if you feel like you are idolizing marriage, this chapter is going to set you straight. Paul made sure to tell you, Don't set your eyes on marriage, because marriage is for a very specific purpose. Marriage is for those people who do not have the gift to stay single, put the desire of sex behind them, and that they have the gift to go forward and devote their life to God. And isn't devoting your life to God better than anything else you can do in this world? Isn't devoting your life to God better than marriage? Isn't devoting your life to God better than having children? Isn't devoting your life to God better than your dream career? Isn't devoting your life to God better than all the money that you thought you were going to make in this world? You over here chasing money, trying to climb the corporate ladder, stressing yourself out. Isn't devoting your life to God better than all of those things? But yet we sit here and we idolize marriage. And when you idolize marriage, you are idolizing man. When you're putting marriage on a pedestal, you are basically saying your husband or your wife comes before God. You don't want to chase after God. You want to chase after another person. Okay, let's see where that gets you. And I say this especially to women, and especially to Black women. I understand, sis. I get it. I understand that we are the most loyal group that when it comes to marrying within our race, right? I understand that you want your Black king so bad. I get it. And I also understand that the number of marriageable Black men is so low in this country. I get it. That it causes a lot of Black women to seek out a partner in desperation, especially as they get older. And I'm going to say this, there is no possible way that you can live in desperation and also live within God's will. I don't care what you're desperate for. If you're desperate for marriage, desperate for that career, desperate for that next check, desperate for a child. If you live within desperation, you are not within God's will, because we know that the Bible says contentment with godliness is great gain. When you are content where you are in whatever season of life that you are, then that is when you are in God's will. If you're always chasing the next thing, never happy with your life, you're desperate for a man, you're desperate for a woman, you are not within God's will. So when you, specifically as a woman, are out here chasing after men, putting on your high heel red bottoms and going to a hotel bar to go during happy hour to go and look for a man, you are outside of God's will. When you go out of your way to go out to eat by yourself and put on a tight dress and go and sit at the bar by yourself, you are outside of God's will. And I remember I had a woman write into me during my Ask Imani Talk segment, and she asked, where do you find good men in Atlanta? Like, what do you need to do to put yourself out there? I think that was the gist of the question. And I've even given this advice. Oh, I don't know, girl. I guess you just got to go to a bar and go by yourself and look cute and hope that someone comes up to you. That advice was outside of God's will. Okay. Whenever you are desperate and you put it in your own hands to go out and find a husband, you are outside of God's will. The Bible never says the woman that finds a husband has found a good thing. No, the Bible says a man that finds a wife has found a good thing. So within that notion, we understand that even if marriage is in the cards for us, it is never up to the woman to go up to any man and be like, God told me you're my husband. God didn't tell you that. God didn't tell you that. You want to know how I know God didn't tell you that? Because it's the man that is supposed to be finding a wife, not the other way around. Whenever a woman has told me about a story to where she has gone up to the man first and went out of her way to give a man her number or to ask a man out on a date, automatically that relationship is not lasting. It's not. I don't care what you say. It's not. Even when I was in the world, I understood that. I always understood it's not a woman's place to go up and ask a man out on a date. Girl, get up, stand up. Y'all out here proposing to men. Y'all are so desperate for a husband that you will desperate yourself out of God's will. And let me tell you something, because I'm sure there are going to be people in the comments that say, well, I went up to my husband and I didn't consult God about my spouse and we're married. Okay. Let me tell you this. Whatever you do outside of the will of God and you do within your own strength, you will be keeping that person or keeping that situation with your own strength for the rest of your life. And think about how exhausting that sounds. to not place your life in God's hands within your own strength and your own power, try to keep a relationship together. Think about that. That's why so many of our marriages are failing today, because no one has submitted their marriage to the will of God. No one has submitted their life to the will of God. They take things into their own hands, and with their own understanding, limited strength, conditional love, and it fails. Even from the beginning, God told us, Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Another verse that talks about a man doing something, a man leaving his family to go and join and be with his wife in one flesh. Not a woman leaving her family to go join her husband. No. A man leaves his family to join his wife. A man who finds a wife has found a good thing. And I hope that what I'm saying is not confining anyone, but I hope with your understanding, you can understand that this should be a freeing message. This should be a freeing message. Oh, if God is going to be the one that appoints my husband, it's not up to me. Okay, I don't got to do all these weird dating tactics that I'm finding out about on TikTok. It should be freeing for you. I know it's freeing for me, because all these years I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I'm not married by now, I'm a failure. Oh my gosh. Well, I never really thought that, but that's what society would tell you. Like, oh my gosh, if I don't get married by 30, then I'm doing something wrong. All you have to do is be within the will of God, and he will provide for you where you are. God knows that you desire a husband. And I think that a lot of times we don't trust God with our lives. We go, oh, well, God hasn't given me a husband by the time I'm 27. He don't know what he's doing. Let me go out here and look for my man. That's what a lot of us do. We put a time limit on God's will, and we say, if God hasn't provided this for me within this time, then he late. He's the one that's late. I'm on time. So let me go ahead and try to do it myself. Go ahead, girl. Try it. Try it. Let's see where that gets you. Because I know for me, it's never gotten me anywhere. Actually, what it's always done, whenever I've gotten impatient and wanted to take things into my own hands, it's always delayed my purpose. Every single time. Every single time I've gotten impatient with God, it's never gotten me anywhere. In fact, it's gotten me 10 steps behind. I could see if I was stagnant. No, it's always put me 10 steps behind whenever I try to take things into my own hands and I don't trust God. I have these flashcards and I write down verses that just stick out to me when I'm reading, because I try to memorize them. And I have this whole little category about trust God, right? Let's see. Philippians 4:19. And my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. Jeremiah 32:27. I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is anything too hard for me? Luke 1:37. For with God, nothing is impossible. John 15:7. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire and it shall be done for you. Psalm 37:4 says, delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. All you have to do is submit your will and your life to God, and he'll give you what you desire. God is not a God that's going to, dangle a husband or wife over you and say, oh, you got to catch it. You got to be quicker than that. He's not like that. He knows that he created us. He knows what we desire. He knows what we desire, but he is just waiting for us to be within his will, right? Because outside of his will, nothing will work for us. Be within his will, delight in the Lord, and he will give you. God knows you want a husband. He knows that. You think he don't know that? You think the God that created all of this, everything around you, don't know that you want a husband? Come on, let's make it make sense. He knows the desires of our heart, but we have to submit to him, delight in him, obey him, and then he will give us these things. So just coming to understand all of these things, reading 1 Corinthians 7, coming to understand what Jesus says about abstinence in marriage, coming to understand what the Bible tells us, what the purpose of marriage is, why God created marriage in the first place. I really came to the understanding not everyone is going to get married. It's actually better for you to remain unmarried and serve the Lord. And marriage is for a specific purpose. And also, if I still desire marriage after all of these things that I know about it, right? God will give me it if I follow him. if I truly submit my will to him. When I came to understand all of those things, I stopped idolizing marriage and I started really putting it. And to be honest with you guys, I'm going to be 100% honest. I idolized marriage so bad to the point where for the 6 years that I wasn't going to church, if I ever thought about going to church, it was only to find a husband. That's how bad I idolized marriage. I used to really think, yeah, I'll go to church on Sunday to see who's around, to look at all the guys. That's how bad it used to be for me. And now that I'm submitting my life to God, he has totally taken away that, not the desire of marriage, but he has replaced my idolatry, right? And me putting marriage on a pedestal. He has totally replaced that mindset with the mind of, I just want to be within his will. God, whatever your will is for my life, let it be that. So if you do not call me to marriage, I want to be happy with that. If you do call me to marriage, I want to be happy with that. He has totally replaced my mindset and my desire to every day and wake up and be like, where the guys at with the dreads? They be saying the cuss word or whatever. He has totally taken away that desire for me to be outside and looking at all the guys. Like, he has totally taken that away because I'm just like, as long as I'm within the will of God and I'm doing his work and I'm doing what he calls me to do, he will provide for me where I am. It is not up to me to find a man. It is not up to me to find a husband. God will provide for me where I am. And when I have totally 100% accepted that, it took so much weight off of my shoulders because now I'm not responsible for that. God will provide for me where I am. And there's so much peace and so much anxiety has been relieved from me when I came to understand that. So I just want to encourage everyone out there. I'm really talking to the women because I think that women do it more so than men when we talk about idolizing marriage. But all of us, I really just want to encourage you all to just put your life in God's hands, submit to his will, and truly seek him first above all things. Before you seek a man, before you seek a career, before you seek children, don't get desperate for anything. And he will meet you where you are, and he'll provide for you what you truly desire. He will not withhold your desires from you. I promise you. That's not our God. He knows what you desire, and he will give it to you once you submit to his will. So I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, another full-length episode is coming out this Friday. So like, subscribe, comment so you can stay in the loop. And I will see you guys later. Bye.